Hello everyone, it's Scott, and we're back for Thursday's previews from week 2 of Final Fantasy spoiler season. We got a bunch of cards to talk about today, but before we do, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Final Fantasy spoiler season and beyond. And if you're looking for cards from the set, you can check us out on the web at caffeinatedgamers.tcgplayerpro.com. And a reminder that at the end of preview season next week, I'll be doing some top 10 lists for the best mythic rares, commons, and uncommons from the set. So let's dive into today's previews. So first we've got Go-Go, Master of Mimicry for 2 and a blue mana. You can legendary creature, that's a wizard and is a 2/4. And for X and X, you can tap Go-Go and copy target activated or triggered ability you control X times. You may choose new targets for the copies. This ability can't be copied, and X can't be 0. So you can't copy the activation, and you can't give 0 for the mana value here. So you got to spend some mana to get this activated. But I can see this as a card in a number of decks that have activated abilities that this would be really helpful to. So I think Go-Go has a chance to see standard play. The question is what kind of deck this is going to fit into, and it's probably going to be a deck with triggered abilities. Yeah, and it would be triggered abilities like the abilities we saw in Tarkir with our mobilize cards, or in some of our other sets that, there's an activation at the beginning of combat, it triggers that ability, and I could see you copying that ability, multiple times, and then rewarding yourself because you're able to get that ability additional times when it comes in, when that ability is going to trigger or when it's activated on a particular card. So Go-Go, I think definitely we'll see some standard play. Next, we've got the Lunar Whale for 3 and a blue mana. You can legendary artifact vehicle. That's a 3/5 with flying. And you may look at the top card of your library at any time. And as long as the Lunar Whale attacked this turn, you may play the top card of your library. And its crew cost is 1. So this is a good vehicle. Getting to look at the top card of your library in blue is always a good ability. And the fact that you can then play the top card of your library if you attack with this, I think makes this certainly, if we do have a vehicles deck that comes out of the Final Fantasy set, then I think this is a card that will probably see some play in it because, getting that information, knowing what's on top of your library, and then knowing that, if you have a land there, you can just play it. Or if you have a spell there, you can play that at any point. I think that is a very powerful ability in Standard, and we'll see where the Lunar Whale ends up. Next, we've got the Regalla for 4 mana. You can legendary artifact vehicle with haste, and is a 4/4. And whenever the Regalla attacks, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a land card. Put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So I really like Regalla. It's a way of ramping yourself. I can see this in a green deck that's going to ramp into cards, and then because it has a crew cost of 1, you just crew it up, and immediately you get an additional land that turn, and each subsequent turn that you attack with it, you're going to get an additional land on the field. And any ramp deck, I think, would want this card because basically you're guaranteed to ramp almost every turn. And the fact that it's a 4/4 makes it harder to block than some other creatures in Standard, because most of the creatures that we have right now are relatively small outside of the dragons that we're seeing played. So the Regalla, I think, is well positioned to be a player in Standard. Next, we've got some lower rarity cards for the day, and the first is the side quest, Hunt the Mark, for 3 and 2 black mana. You get an enchantment. When this enchantment enters the battlefield, destroy up to one target creature. And at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under an opponent's control this turn, create a treasure token. Then, if you control 3 or more treasures, transform this enchantment. So I can see this in a deck where you're creating treasure tokens as part of what you're doing in the game. So if that's the case, yes, you're going to have to spend 5 mana on this, but you get to kill an opponent's creature. And then if you've got those 3 treasure tokens, then you can flip it and you get Yamazmat, Ultimate Mark, legendary creature. That's a dragon and a 5/6. And for 1 and a black mana, you could sacrifice another creature or artifact, and Yamazmat gains indestructible until end of turn, and you tap it. So we've had other cards with similar abilities in Standard that have seen play where you have an ability to give them indestructible. So I think this is actually a playable Magic card. The question is, it's going to have to be in a deck where you are going to be creating treasure tokens naturally. And then when you play this for 5 mana, you're killing something and then immediately transforming it on your end step. And if we can find that right deck for it, I think this is a good Magic card. Next, we've got Veni's Treachery for 1 and a black mana. You get an instant with Kicker, and you can sacrifice an artifact or a creature to kick the spell, and target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. If the spell was kicked, that creature gets -6/-6 until end of turn. And I think it's a comment, it's limited playable. We probably won't see it outside of limited. Next, we've got Weapons Vendor for 3 and a white mana. You get a Human Artificer, that's a 2/2. And when this creature enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control an artifact, you may pay 1. When you do, attach target equipment you control to target creature you control. So Weapons Vendor, I think, it's 4 mana, so it's a high cost for it. But the ability to move an equipment for only 1 mana between creatures, I think is really powerful. So I would not be surprised if we see at least a couple copies of this in the equipment deck that is probably going to be in Boros colors, because being able to move that for 1 mana, I think is a really solid ability, and I think we'll see a little bit of Standard play because of that. Next, we've got Promptu Argentum for 1 and a red mana. You elect a creature that's a human scout and is a 2/2 with haste. And he has Selfie Shot, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, if at least 4 mana was spent to cast it, create a treasure token. So here's a guy that helps with the side quest that we just talked about, where if you're casting spells that are at least 4 mana that are non-creature spells, then you get a payoff for those. And because of that, I think those 2 cards kind of go together, because I think it will be possible, using things like the Regalia and some other stuff to regularly be casting spells for 4 mana that you're going to get that activation from. Next, we get Reach the Horizon for 3 and a green mana. You get a sorcery and search your library for up to 2 basic lands and or town cards with different names. Put them onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. So I don't think this is going to see much, if any, Standard play. Outside of if we do have a dedicated town deck, this is a way to get towns. So normally this ability is 3 mana to get 2 lands. The fact that they get to go on the battlefield is helpful with this, but I don't think we'll see it outside of a town deck in Standard. Next, we've got a couple more legendary creatures, and the first is Omega, Heartless Evolution for 5 and a green and a blue mana. You get a legendary artifact creature, Robot, that's an 8/8. And it has Wave Cannon. When Omega enters the battlefield, for each opponent, tap up to 1 target non-land permanent that opponent controls. Put X stun counters on each of those permanents, and you gain X life, where X is the number of non-basic lands you control. So really interesting card here. I don't think this was designed for Standard. I think it was really designed for Commander. but maybe there's some standard playability in a ramp deck. You know, it is an 8/8 for 7 mana, but if you can ramp into this, then I think it's possibly going to see some standard play, because being able to, you know, go ahead and stun one of your opponent's creatures and put a number of stun counters on it equal to the number of non-basic lands you have. So that could be 3, 4, 5 stun counters on it. So basically, you would be removing that creature from the game at that point, but it's still going to be on the battlefield. Now, if it has activated abilities like Sheoldred, which triggers when you draw a card, you know, then it's not going to be as great. But I think this has an outside chance of seeing a little bit of standard play. But I really think this is a very good commander card, because being able to prevent your opponents in commander from using their best creature for a large number of turns is a very solid ability for commander. Next, we've got Ignis Scientia. For 1, a green and a blue mana, you legendary creature that's a human advisor and is a 2/2. And when Ignis enters the battlefield, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield, tapped, put the rest on the bottom in a random order. And he also has, I've come up with a new recipe. For 1, a green and a blue mana, exile target card from a graveyard. If a creature card was exiled this way, you get to create a food token. So probably not going to see much standard play, but it does ramp you when it comes into play. So possibly a ramp deck might want this. Certainly this will be a very good limited card because it will ramp you in limited. So I would definitely, if this came up in my limited pool and I was in the blue and green colors, I'd want this card because it's going to ramp me and move me faster, because I'm going to, you know, be able to, you know, get another land. So I'm going to 4 lands on turn 3, hopefully. And that's going to help you out in the game in limited quite a bit. All right, let's talk about our last 2 cards of the day. And the first is the Gold Saucer. It's a town, and it taps 4 colorless mana. And for 2 mana, you can flip a coin. If you win the flip, create a treasure token. And for 3 mana, you can tap it and sacrifice 2 artifacts to draw a card. So it has a way of creating artifacts and also then using those artifacts to sacrifice to draw cards. So I think, again, in the town deck, that's going to be a playable card. Probably not going to see play outside of that. But in a town deck, I think it's, you know, certainly a card you would be considering putting as part of your deck. And our last card of the day is World Map. For 1 mana, you get an artifact. And for 1 mana, you can sacrifice this artifact, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Or for 3 mana, you can tap it and sacrifice this artifact and search your library for a land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. So I like the flexibility on the world map. Now, is it going to be good enough for standard? I'm not sure that it'll be good enough for standard, but we do have Delirium decks out there that want artifacts in the graveyard. So maybe this would fit into that kind of deck. And yes, you're going to spend 1 mana to play it and then another mana to get a basic land. But maybe where you're really going is you're going to spend 4 total mana and then you get one of your non-basics. And that could be really important in standard. All right, so those are our cards from Thursday's previews. Thanks for staying to the end of the video. And remember, I'll be back with some top 10 lists next week. And I've put a link to our entire playlist for Final Fantasy here. And thanks again for staying to the end of the video. And I will see you in the next one.